Look here. A story that I made up for you. A scenario I drew out. You recall it was a military installation wherein they were convinced that spying had been going on. Or, I gave you a choice that night. It'd be like a apartment complex somewhere that many people had been attacked and assaulted by some nefarious nighttime character. And so the authorities put out the word in either case. They're going to stake out the place, and the authorities, like the police, say, all right, anybody that you find lording around the military installation or this complex, stop them. Very shortly, they catch a guy there. For no known reason, hanging out. No doubt the guy's just hanging about. But almost as soon as they talk to him, identify themselves, he says, I'm glad to know you're here because that's why I was here. I am a concerned citizen. I am a good neighbor, and I was out here hoping to help you people. I'm here keeping an eye out. And the authorities, I pointed out, if that was all they had to go on, just a suspicious guy, and they had already decided, their first story was, what we're going to do is stake this place out because it's not hit or miss. People keep getting attacked here, or whatever evidence or suspicions they have that spying is going on. It is a continuing flow of such suspicions or evidence. And sure enough, somebody is lording about. Somebody fits the description of their first story. The first story being, stop anybody, any unauthorized hangers about. And then this guy, and that's all the evidence that's their whole first story, and then all the evidence that they can get from him is as soon as they identify themselves, he says, oh, well boy, I'm glad you people are here. I've been very concerned. I've been here on my own acting as a concerned citizen. Then I pointed out, the way I detailed the story, that the authorities became very confused. Now trust me, there was nothing else to go on. But at first they pounced on this guy. He fit the profile of their first story. Surely, I say hopefully, that you people that have any sort of different ears, even the night I used that, did suspect that there had to be something else, or else I had lost all touch myself, that there was something else to the story, not having to do with spying or somebody engaged in assaulting his fellow man. So let me see if I can drag some of this together with what we've been talking about for the last few tapings. Another way to look at this, so I'll go ahead and admit it now, let's consider, by God, that the story has allegorical potential. So the guy, they pounce out the authorities. Now, I don't know, the authorities could be what? How about your old established intelligence? Okay. The authorities jump out and say, aha, we have somebody fitting the description, a troublemaker, an interloper, perhaps even a danger to the established order, the peace and quiet of our brain, the locale, our city. And the guy says, oh, glad to see you. I do not have the credentials of a policeman, but I am a concerned citizen. And more of us should be out. I decided on my own to come out and help. The authorities cannot tell on that basis, from all the information I've given you, they cannot tell, as they would call it, whether the man is being truthful or not. And if you now begin to try and stretch this into some area that might have some usefulness, it's not simply me up here flapping my lips to tell a story. You could look at it this way. The authorities, rather than just say they can't tell whether he's telling the truth, that's about all you can do in the 3D world, is refer to people telling the truth or not telling the truth, which is really non-operational in a new area of thinking. Because the three-dimensional idea of what's true and what's not true is so flawed, it is so lacking, that it's always at best 3/5 of either being true or being not true, which is just a form of saying it's operational. So when I say in the story originally that the authority is now with this guy, and he says, "Hey, I'm glad to see you. I'm here trying to help." And then they kind of collapse. There they all stand around with their hands in their pockets, and there he stands and smiling. And they don't know whether he's telling the truth. But now, try it this way. They do not know whether the information, that is his story, is useful or not. They cannot tell friend from foe. But very quickly, even quicker than I'm saying it, snatch out friend from foe as being a material, physical reality. That is, that this guy is either the mad rapist or spy, or he's not. Look at the guy as being a form of information, because that's how it ends up they're dealing with. And they jump out and they flash their badges and say, "All right, hold it. Who are you?" "Ah, I'm John Q. Neighbor. Boy, I'm glad you guys are here. I was out here on my own trying to help out." Right now, when I say that the authorities cannot tell friend from foe, forget the guy being friend from foe. Now think about information. They can't tell whether it's friendly information or whether it's adversarial information, which is another way of saying they cannot tell whether the information is useful. Now in a 3D world, all kinds of stuff's useful. Information that seems to be false can be useful. Right? All right, I guess I got to tell you. If the guy says, they said, "Who are you?" And he says, "Oh, I'm Julio Gottlieb." And they said, "Well, let's see some ID." And he goes, he said, "I don't have my billfold." And they said, "What's that?" And they reach in his pocket and there's his billfold, and they take it out, and his name is John Smith. They learned something, right? They learned something from incorrect information in the 3D world. You follow? That in the 3D world, the whole idea that good information, useful information, would have to be true information, as the 3D intellect would call it. And false information would be useless. That's what we're trying to avoid. But it's not true. In the 3D world, what people ordinarily call either true or false is equally useful. But for revolutionary purposes, it's also true it's equally useful. That is, it doesn't matter. It won't get you anywhere. Now, in the 3D world, they can say, "Well, now we got more suspicions that this guy is not an honest citizen, or why would he have lied? Why would he have given us initially false information?" So now we're getting somewhere. Right, in the 3D world, okay. There's always an illusion of getting somewhere, like getting on a merry-go-round. You pays your money and you get on a roller coaster. The thing's taking off at 90 miles an hour once it gets over the peak, and you say, "Boy, we're getting somewhere." Yeah, but you end up right where you got on. If you're trying to look at it from a more complex view, if we were talking about, leave us say, a 5-dimensional universe, then information in the 3D segment of a 5D complexity, it would be, I'm not going to try to prove it to you mathematically because it wouldn't be possible. We'd run out of dimensions, if not numbers. But that which would, at the 3D level, in the 3D areas that would be extant within a 5D complex, whether from the 3D view the information was true or false, is more or less, trust me, without me having to prove it, irrelevant. It just does not come into play. It has no major impact on what would be useful information at a 5D level. All right, crude picturization. It would be somewhat like you trying to talk to your liver, if it could respond in some way. Why do I always pick on the liver? Well, I know why, but I don't want to go into it. Why should any of us bring up our drinking, If you tried to talk to your liver and you tried to ask your liver such things as, sometimes I don't feel too good, do you have anything to do with that? Are you sometimes taking a nap, or are you trying to experiment? Are you giving me trouble? And your liver said, some of the cells said no, and some of the cells said yes. You understand? If you tried to talk to individual cells, or a cell somewhere, and it went, I think some of these other guys are not really on the ball. I can hear snoring going on all around me. To get concerned over whether that one liver cell is saying the truth or not, do you see that it would have almost no consequence over the possibility that you are about to suffer from hepatitis, or that you are, or that cirrhosis of the liver is about to close down 9/10 of your liver? What one cell said, for you to try to pursue that one cell says, hey, we're working our little buns off. I can speak for all of us down here. There's not a liver cell down here that's not on the ball. And you thought, well, I better check this out, because I've never seen any group of anybody, much less whatever it takes you, 1 million liver cells to make up a liver. I've never seen 1 million people anywhere, or cells or molecules, all go in the same direction. So I'm going to pursue that and find out where that cell's lying to me. You understand? It's almost a waste of time. It has no impact. It has no real validity to say that that's true information or false information, because maybe that cell was lying. But so what? In the scheme of a larger complex, it just got no consequences. You just can't even take notice. It's just irrelevant. Thusly, although at the 3D level it seems important, and it is important there now, but of course I've also got to add, it's not everybody on this planet takes the 3D world as being the last word in reality. So when I say it is important, I'm talking about to the general wheel, the public. But at that level, what seems to be important in information, that is this information true, or is this information false? At that level, it's important. The world as we know it at the earth level, 3D level, would fall apart if you could not distinguish at the 3D level information that was valid and information that was invalid. But looked at from a more complex view, it is almost of no consequence. You hadn't lost your place, right? No, we're right here. The guy says, yes, I'm a concerned citizen. And the authorities have to kind of fall back for a minute and go, well, now what do we do? What's your name? He tells them. They ask for ID, and he shows them, and it is him. They say, where do you live? And he says, well, just around the corner, 2 blocks away. And yes, sure enough, his address is there. You own your own home? Yes. How long have you been there? 35 years. And everything was going so well that there they were, crouched down in the bushes, defending the old established rules of order, protecting their society, and they leap out. Here's a guy they've never seen, and the guy's hanging around at an odd time of night. They watched him long enough, he's doing nothing. The man is obviously hanging around. People don't just hang around. Information don't just hang around, it's got to be up to something. They leap out, who are you? So he tells them, he lives there, and he stands there smiling, and then all they can do is kind of stand around, scratch their rumps. They now seem to be locked into a temporary state of indecision as to whether they're dealing with a friend or a foe. They just can't tell. Again, I'll try to get you to split your thinking back and forth from this actual 3-dimensional solid example of this guy, and then talking about information and an individual nervous system. Old thinking cannot readily divine between useful new information and useful flawed information, or new flawed information. Ordinary intelligence is left standing there like these cops that jumped out of the bushes, and everything was going so well until they said, friend or foe? Useful info or not? And there's really no satisfying 3-dimensional response forthcoming. It is another aspect of the fact that life is continuing to always offer up a first story. And the first story, to fit my definition of it, a first story always initially satisfies. Always. That's why it's a first story. And we're not kind of anomalies. For those of you who might be getting this on tape at some other time in some other place for the first time, I will point out to you and remind the rest of them that the world is big enough for everybody and everything, and that life has tried everything at least once. I don't care what. I mean, think of it. Think of the weirdest thing that you ever heard of or thought about. Life has done it once, or you wouldn't even thought about it. That might have been all it did, was it made you think about it that one time. So life has tried everything, and we're not speaking of that. We're not speaking that one time you were staying on a street corner and suddenly a helicopter crashed and fell upon a band of nuns who were doing some sort of Norwegian folk dance on one foot. And as everybody stood there startled and speechless, you leaped up, whipped off your pants, took off your shorts and put them on your head and hollered, "Eureka! The time must be now." I'm just trying to, we could say that that was the first story, but you will assume that you were in the midst of an otherwise sane local environment. No one would pay any attention. It would be just something that'd be laughed like did it one time. So we're not talking about that. That does not classify as a first story. A first story must have an existence. It must be shared by more than one person. It must have a life in space, that is, in three-dimensional time. So a first story always satisfies for some period of time, or else it's not a first story. That is, it does not survive. It would be just an anomaly, like you jumping up with that scene I made up with your shorts on your head and hollering "Eureka!" Blah, blah, blah. So the first story always satisfies. Now, to jump into my artificial and arbitrary scenario, the police is confronted with this problem, with this spy or this person who's assaulting people continually, and they can't catch him. So they come up, "Look, we got to do something. The mayor's going to have our jobs. We're all going to be done for. We'll all have to get real jobs and go to work if we don't do something." So somebody says, "Here's what we'll do." And so out here, always going back to the scene of the crime, and every time he does it and we can't find clues, "Look, let's just everybody get together and we'll hide all around that complex or the base, and we'll all get down in bushes. We'll cover, even if it's your night off, let's get out there and do that." And he keeps doing it over and over. So all we got to do is just stay there all night, stay awake, and whoever comes around and loiters around, we'll catch whoever it is just hanging around, because he's got to come there for a few minutes before he decides to strike. And they go, "All right, okay." There is a first story. There are always first stories everywhere, and there are first stories within first stories, but verbally we got to go somewhere. So they all go, "Okay, good idea." And whoever's in charge says, "Right, you go here, you go there." And you see anybody loitering, and the police always know what a loiterer is. If you see anybody just hanging around, stop them. I mean, just as soon as you realize that this person is just loitering, stop him. And they'll go, "Hey, right, Chief, got it." All right, that was a satisfying first story. I don't mean whether they were satisfied having to work on their night off, or they're out there in the bushes cramped down and the dews getting all over their clovers. But it was satisfying. That is, in regard to the premise of we need to catch these, whoever this guy is, this would seem to be leading to some kind of the possibility of a conclusion, a satisfactory conclusion. So the first story is initially satisfying. Stop everyone that's loitering around the area. But as soon as the first story is pushed at all, it begins to unravel. This is part of a first story. There is no standard three-dimensional time limit. The first story might last a couple of hours, in this case, before they jump out on John Q. Public, the concerned citizen, and he says, "Hey, I'm here to help." Then the first story of the way we're going to save our phony baloney jobs by catching that guy is to stake it out and to stop anybody that shows up looking suspicious. And sure enough, one guy shows up showing suspicious, but he's got a story that makes them all go. That is, the first story begins to crumble. That might have only taken 2 hours, but sometimes the first story could last 2,000 years before it begins to crumble. But it is a part of the first story. The first section is the first story. For it to be a first story, that is, it's operational, functional, serving a purpose in life's body via man. the first story is initially satisfying to those who need it. That here's what let's do. Or here's what let's believe. Here's what we should all be planning. Whatever the first story, to those directly affected by it, the first story is initially satisfying. And forget trying to shave off any conditions and maybe. If it's a first story, it is generally satisfying. People go, all right. And it's like we will behave on this basis, that this offers all sorts of promise for some sort of hope, some sort of satisfying conclusion to this. But the second part of the story, of a first story, is always this, that as soon as it's pushed past the initial stage, whether it takes 2 years or 2,000 years, it can be gradual, which of course it's easier for you to think about 2,000 years being a gradual crumbling, that is 2 hours, but that's your problem. At any rate, the second aspect is that as soon as the story, or whenever the story is pushed beyond the initial phase, it will begin to crumble and will begin to be dissatisfying. That is, that 2 hours before, all these cops are going, yeah, that's what we'll do. Damn good idea. Glad you thought of it, Chief. We'll do that. We'll get the guy and that'll be it. 2 hours later, the story's been pushed. That is, they're confronted with this guy who has a story that does not fit into the first story. And they're left with, wait a minute, they cannot tell friend from foe. They cannot tell, on the basis of the evidence there, whether the guy is telling the truth or not. That is, whether the information is good or whether the information is flawed. The story now has been pushed. In this case, it's been pushed to the point of having to execute the plan. And as soon as they execute the plan, aha, and they jump out, we got you. Who are you? Oh, I live around the corner. I was here trying to help. I didn't know you were here. I was here trying to watch out, to help out the community. Now the plan has been, apparently, if we were talking about 2 hours before when they first started doing it, you'd think, well, now the plan is coming right to fruition. But it gets right to that point, and not fruition, it's frustration. That now they're staying there and they don't know what to do. Ordinary intelligence cannot divine good information from bad information. And yet, three-dimensional wise, it continually does so. That is, life does so through man. Things continue to expand, move in whatever way they're expanding and moving. And so in the sense of 3D information being correctly, usefully, divined as either being useful or not, then it's true. But in the specific instance of me trying to talk about individual nervous systems, individual brains, if they were involved with that kind of scenario I had painted out externally, the people involved, the cops involved, would be left with, what do we do now? The plan reached a point that they would have said 2 hours previously, if it took 2 hours, that we had now reached the point of either absolute fruition, that we just caught him red-handed, or we'd be real close. That the first story was put into operation. And what happened? Frustration. Humanity, 3D intelligence is absolutely wired, is absolutely primed, always for a first story, for a grand design, but it is simultaneously, although it appears to operate in some linear fashion, but it is simultaneously, it is equally, is wired and primed to become confused, to become irritated, even frightened by the story, by the design at a later date, if need be. So you can be absolutely delighted to hear the grand design, to hear this new theory, to hear this new belief system, to hear this new plan, to hear this new idea. And if you are, and you're just ordinary, you are equally prepared, you're equally constructed in your own nervous system, your own brain, to at a later time become very confused by this story that right now is just knocking your socks off. That I'm just delighted. God, how great. Might I add this? The idea of the plan does not necessarily have to apparently come from some extrinsic source. It can be that, Now I have a plan. Here's what I'll do. God, I love it. Jesus, if I could kiss my brain. You're delighted with the first story. Here's my plan. Here's my idea. Here's my dream. You are equally already constructed to reach a point in that first story that if need be, it gets pushed far enough that this story even begin to materially go into operation. You are equally primed and wired to become frustrated by it, because if it's pushed far enough, it will begin to unravel, whatever it is. I'm not going to go into any great detail of digging up historical, very blatant examples. I can just take all the areas in life historically and even in your own existence that seems to be great manifestations of irony. Institutions, movements, becoming their own opposite. People talking one way and behaving another. What was the younger generation in that Kairut? Accused them of, God forbid, hypocrisy. Can you hear a different, a more complex operational definition, which is the only real revolutionary definition of anything, of such ideas as irony? That is, the first story is functional, satisfying, but if it's pushed far enough, if it has any sort of life, it is going to come apart. And the very thing that pleased the people, it satisfied them in the beginning. People, or people, singular or plural, will eventually push far enough, the story will unravel, and it will frustrate them, irritate them. And yet the way the brain looks at it, it's always going on somewhere else. That, my God, this movement started out, it was a peace movement, and now every time I get around them, they start fights with people. They just don't see the irony in it. There is an aspect under 3D atmospheric conditions such that really, whatever that may mean for the time being, quotation marks, and really, new information is always oppressive, because information itself confuses, it frightens, it can even cripple the old data. With ordinary people, this has no particular consequence. It could be seen on a wider scale that would apparently be taking place externally, that is, historically. It's seen the kinds of fits and starts that apparent progress makes, scientific, technological, social. But when information begins to approach what would really be new, that is, pieces of it are still wrapped around the corner into fourth and fifth dimension, that is almost, it has less than normal connections with established information. It's all a matter of relativity in the 3D area of a more complex universe. But if whatever it would be that I'm trying to hint to you, really new information would be such that it oppresses and it frightens, the more it is seen, the more it is felt to be new information, people, if you're looking at it historically, are sociologically apparently affecting others. Internally, what it amounts to is as information begins to approach something really new, that is the kind of thing that somebody trying to do this kind of stuff really wants. It frightens. It is felt to be oppressive and can even temporarily cripple the old established data. Consider again my story and this concerned citizen that they jump out to catch. Consider that instead of a good neighbor and a concerned citizen, that he was really new information. The police jump out right in line with their satisfactory first story. It's what we'll do. We'll lay in wait and we'll pounce on anybody that doesn't belong around here. Because we know now who belongs here. We know everybody that lives in the complex, or we know all the people on this base. They all have IDs. We know who they are. So all we got to do is hang around and find somebody that doesn't belong here. Find information that's almost new. Information that, what are you doing in this neighborhood? And so what happens? The old established data, the authorities, end up being confused. They can end up even being frightened. Now, I didn't throw that into the story, of course, because you wouldn't say it necessarily on a real, strictly material description of this one guy with this story that does not fit into their expectations, would not necessarily physically be frightening all these policemen. But what becomes frightening is that they had a plan, they had a first story, that's it. We have got the deal sewn up. All we got to do is stop anybody that doesn't belong here, and we'll have our man. And so they do exactly that, and what have they got? They don't have their man. They're not even sure what they got. The ordinary intelligence, the old data cannot readily divine between friend or foe. But it is almost rendered dysfunctional for a bit to be confronted with information that it cannot decide is either useful or not, that is, true or not. And so the police are having to stand around. You know, the CIA, they got this guy, and he's not going anywhere. He's not trying to run. And this is where the plan should have. Now they're all having to kind of look at each other. It's time of confusion, uncertainty. And they can become frightened, not just by him. That's why I didn't use it in the allegory to start with. Not by him physically. But they can become frightened over the fact that we're supposed to be doing a certain job. We had a first story. That is, we had a plan that was the plan. We put it in operation. We sprung the trap. The plan worked right up to the time that it should have been appeared here on the sentence. And we don't even know whether it worked or didn't work. What happened was the whole thing has been rendered sort of temporarily out of order. That our whole plan, our intelligence, what we're up to, our purpose in life, our jobs, everything, this whole scenario to them has kind of become dysfunctional. That's frightening. If you're not following this is frightening when it happens. There's similar things happen to people. Some of it, I'm sure, it's happened to some of you. It's at a very ordinary level of people believing they're going crazy. Not people that necessarily end up going there, but the times that people may be sitting around and who knows for what reason, that you had 400 cups of coffee in a row, or you had a bug or something. And you look around and it's like your whole perception of reality, your whole mode of reality, like you feel like you're about to explode, or you might jump out a window or scream, or you just feel like, I don't know what's going to happen the next second. This is not real life. That is, this is not ordinary life. It is frightening. It can be crippling to the point of being just disabilitating, that people can't function. Now, not just limited to a passing feeling of I'm maybe going crazy, what's happening here. Go back to my story of the authorities, the police. Established old thinking is not just physically frightened of this one guy that they cannot really identify as being a friend or foe, whether he's telling the truth, but it's information such that it renders all of their plans and all of their concepts, it renders them, at least temporarily, inoperable. And that's how they're left standing there, and that becomes frightening on the basis of, well, what do we do? We used all of our best resources. We had the story. We had a grand design. We did it. We sprung it. It's like opening your Christmas present and you open it up. So where do I go three-dimensionally with this? You open it up and inside is nothing. Not nothing, but there is no inside of the box. Something like that. Well, there is a very specific use for this. If some of this sounded too allegorical, just consider it at a very ordinary level. This happens to people constantly, ordinary people and to you, of being confronted with new information and how it momentarily is not only disorienting, but can make people mad. Now, let's say that you drive to your grandmother's twice a year, or however many times, down a certain highway. It takes you several hours, and you can get in there with your girlfriend or your wife. You can talk, you can listen to radio, you can almost take a nap, and you drive there. And you're driving along, and you pass this one intersection out in the country or wherever it is, and suddenly something just kind of caught your eye, and you keep driving another mile or so, and it really bugs you. You're not sure why, and you say, I got something on that sign. You go back, and sure enough, the sign says, temporary end of whatever road it is, 3 miles ahead, detour this way. Detour to State Highway 114. And you get there, and you have never gone that way. You never even go into this state, into this county, into this area, except down this one road to visit grandmother. And people very ordinarily will sit there and look at the sign, and the sign says quite clearly, going the way you always go, it says, the road stops, a bridge out, 3 miles down here. Go this way, down highway such and such town. And ordinary intelligence can go, I've never been to that town, you don't even like the name of it, it just happens like that. But it's like your brain even says the name of the town, like Figville. And you're kind of disoriented because you were driving, not even thinking in any kind of real sense. Just driving along, you would have gotten to grandmother's, probably. And now it says you can't do that, you got to stop, you had to back up, and it's like, I say momentarily. Remember, this is all spatial descriptions. Momentarily can happen on a greater level over 2,000 years. But in this case, you're disoriented for a second, and it is not unusual at all for the individual human brain, nervous system in this case, to become irritated even. Well, goddamn, why don't they keep bridges up? Why don't we go here? And you don't know why. You don't know whether it's going to take any longer. The road may be better than the one you've been going. But you can just be like, oh, damn it, Jesus. What are you cursing? What are you mad about? I'm going to suggest to you, from a more complex view, it is over at a pretty routine level, over the appearance of new information. Now, don't sit there if you're ordinary. Of course, you're ordinary, why the hell are you sitting there? But don't listen to yourself say, well, it's just one other little thing to do, another little small irritation in life, and you had to back up and all that. No. If that was all of it, surely you can get a whiff of this. Why would ordinary intelligence, reasonable, everyday, middle-class people, why would they internally talk to themselves and make fun or say something sarcastic about the name of the place you got to go through? Figville, Jesus. Or say something about governments and why don't they keep bridges up? And just faster than I can, of course, talk, if your nervous system can say something like a bridge out, probably because the highway commissioner of this state probably is raking off all the money instead of fixing up the bridges. All kinds of sarcastic, hostile, aggressive flows of energy. To you, it's talking to yourself. Having to do with what? That you had to back up and you got to go down another highway that you don't really know whether it's going to be longer or shorter or a better road. It's something new. It's new information. You don't even know whether it's good information. You don't know whether it's friendly or non-friendly. You don't know whether the road's going to be better, worse. You don't know whether it's going to take longer, less time. The reality of it, enough of you should know this by now. But you specifically, is why I made up the story and brought it up again, concede that old information, that is, it's your brother's brain. If you remember that story from a while back. And don't tell me that some of you are an only child. Everybody got a brother. Everybody got a brother, and he lives at home. He ain't got no job. He ain't going to get no job. He ain't ever going to leave home. You got a brother. Yes, sir. And your brother's brain, I hate to tell you, but he does most of the thinking for you. At any rate, your brother's brain is always on guard whether there's been anything specific happen recently in your own brain or in your own life that makes you think that there's some danger, that there may be an assault pending on you, there may be a spy, but he's always on guard, and if new information shows up, he will jump out of the bushes just like the cops and go, what's going on here? What is this? Who are you? And your brother's brain, in case you hadn't noticed, except in very minor ways that are necessary to keep life rolling at the most mundane level, but if it gets anywhere out of just a normal flow, such as following road signs or asking somebody what time it is, if it gets much more complicated than that, your brother is always prepared to jump out of bushes and go, all right, who are you? Who are you? When it's something at least out of the ordinary, but then not have any ability whatsoever. As soon as he's given a reasonable first story by this guy. So he's already got his first story. His first story is, I'm it. His first story is, whatever I know is it. Anything I don't know, I don't need to know. If I don't know it, it's not knowable. Or if I don't know it, it's not true. In other words, I'm me. Huh? I'm me. Who are you? New information shows up and it says, who are you? And if it's any more complex than getting the time, road directions, just everyday affairs, if it gets any more complex, the new information is inclined to say, I'm glad you asked because I'm here to help you. I'm your friend. That's not the only thing it could say, but that kind of thing to go on with my story and say, here's my ID, I'm so-and-so, I was here to help. Nobody's brother's brain, past the most simplistic level, has any ability to then decide, is this guy telling the truth or not? Is this friend or foe? Is this valid, useful information, or is this just a more partial, flawed info? That's what everybody's brother's brain is up to. And it becomes discombobulated. It'll become irritated. And it can become crippled. Such as somebody getting so mad of having to back up and find out that there is a detour to Grandma's house, they could get so mad, an ordinary person, that several hours later you find them still sitting there in their car, right there in front of the detour sign, steaming. That not their automobile, but their own nervous system has almost been temporarily rendered inoperable. They're just sitting there. That is kind of the state of me saying getting crippled, that the brain can go through, the old established brain, the old thinking can go through almost a kind of dissatisfaction, confusion, irritation, and even a crippling. They can just temporarily just quit playing, just on the basis of new information. If it's really new, the more new it is, the more this is inclined to happen to people. Now, on a quite general level, I have mentioned this many times, and I'm sure that many of you have thought about many times about new info, but the specific I wanted to point out is that this is a natural state of things, and you have an opportunity always there. It's one of the, I'm stressing that the allegory has some pertinent pragmatic use, that you have a lull in the time when old established ways of thinking are first caught sort of flat-footed, taken aback at the time when they can't tell whether this hanger-on, this loiterer, is actually who he says he is. Is he a friend? Is he a foe? Is this information dangerous? Is it good? Is it trustworthy? Is it just a bunch of baloney? Is it a sham? The guy, look at all he could have done if you followed the way I'm trying to make up the picture. The cops jump out and they're so glad. Aha! Who are you? He says, oh, I live around the corner. Been there 35 years. I'm a retired judge, and I was here trying to help out. Now imagine, that's what I'm trying to do with my little theatrics. These cops and their guns drawn, all ready to go, and the whole thing has just suddenly come apart. All right, if the guy then was up to something, if he had some great plan in mind, he's got an opportunity. He could run for it. He could suddenly rip off his pants and put his shorts on his head. He could make faces at them. They probably wouldn't know if you did it real fast. They're all going, There is a lag. There is a time in which, three-dimensionally speaking, there is a time in which old information, old ways of thinking, are rendered almost staying there scratching their rump. Got their guns drawn, their badges, their good facial expressions. All right, who are you? Aha! Now we got you. And it turns out that perhaps, no, we don't got him. In fact, I don't know what's going on. And so there you are. That is your brother's brain going, And you got some free time almost, not just limited future. You've almost got some loose time there Because the old nervous system, the old way of thinking, the closer it is in contact with relatively newer and newer information, the more it is rendered temporarily inoperable. And it will go through, if it runs its course as the 3D world will, if it runs a normal course, it will go from being confused to being irritated to being perhaps even crippled by it. It just has to walk away from it, has to forget about it, has to take a break, take a nap, take a drink. How's this for a wrap-up? We'll pretend this doesn't have any particular pertinence to what I was talking about. Closing chorus for the night. Although life may not really need people that might be doing stuff like this, I guess you'll have to take my word for it. Although it may not need people doing this, it seems to enjoy it. It seems as though life has a kind of strange enjoyment of people who try to fly with no particular plans, no maps, no grand design, no apparent predetermined destination, and who down there don't even have a plane. I cannot tell you that life actually needs people doing this. But I can tell you, well, I said trust me, but some of you can already feel the reality. In some way, I was suggesting, hinting to you, it gets a kind of strange enjoyment out of it. Now, at least you thought I was ending up with something that sounded almost transcendental or metaphysical. What I just said, rather than me saying life, I suggest you enjoy it, even if it doesn't actually need this. Which I wasn't going to stop and really take all this apart, but a good case could be made for life not actually needing this. On the basis they've actually needed this, there'd be more of it going on throughout history, right? So, you could say, relatively speaking, life may not actually need people like you, assuming you're actually doing this in some way. But then I said, and it can almost be felt if you can get past three-dimensional limits for a second or think about it, that it does enjoy it, of having people attempt to do this. Now, rather than leave you that may sound like that I was trying to slip in some kind of message from some kind of spooky area of forces or some kind of New Age flim-flam. What I just said does not sound at all similar to what I was describing of the way older thinking might be looking at new revolutionary type of information. Come on, it's the final minutes. Try and stretch your brain. That rather than just the old information being, as I was describing it, confused, frightened, crippled, right quick, you go beyond that. Take older information now being more complex, being better than it actually is. Then what I just described about life not actually needing people to do this, but seems to enjoy it. Think about older information. It'd have to be unusual people, I grant you that. But the older information can look at this newer stuff showing up and think, well, I don't need that. That's kind of enjoyable, though. This new information, I don't think knows much of anything. Doesn't know where it's going, doesn't know what it's doing. Probably kind of irrational or who knows what. It's certainly not very commercially inclined, or I'm not sure it's all that reasonable and down to earth, whether it could actually change the fuse, or I don't know. I don't actually need that, but what if old information could look at new information, such as I was saying life, might be able to look at people doing this, and I don't really need this, but isn't that kind of fun to watch them? They're actually trying to fly. They got no plans, they got no maps, and none of them, those that are really trying to fly in the right way, there's no destination. And they got, as far as I can tell, they hadn't come up with a plane, not for where they're trying to go. And yet they do it. Do you see or hear any similarity? To close out the week, would it not make some of you feel good for me to point out, or to say at least rhetorically, does that not hint to those with different ears of how close some of you, started to say us, but some of you might be in line with life's little hobbies?